All right, guys, so far in Chapter 13, we've talked about solving by factoring. We've solved by formula using the quadratic. Today we're going to solve by completing the square. Completing the square is really not that big of a deal. It's a process. You may not like it at first, but I promise you if you can do this well, it's the easiest way. First, we're going to talk about solving something in terms of something else. We're going to go through this really quick. It says x squared plus bx plus c. We want to, in terms of b, what would c equal? Now, I'm not going to show you how we derived it, but basically when you're trying to find c and completing the square, you're going to take your b value, divide it by 2, and you're going to square it. Okay, that's really the main part of the math you have to do for most of these. Take your b value, divide it by 2, square it. So it says what term is needed to complete the square in these three below. What you're going to do is exactly what we just said. They haven't given us a c. We're going to make a c that'll make this that will complete the square and make it a perfect square trinomial. So what we're going to do is take our b value in each of these. In this one, b is 2. I'm going to take that 2 and I'm going to fill it into this equation. So I have 2 over 2 squared. Well, 2 over 2 is 1 squared, and 1 squared is 1. So I'm going to take that 1, I'm going to place it in my c value. So what we basically found is c. Now let's do the same thing in the next one. My b value here is 10. So I fill it out that c is going to equal 10 divided by 2 squared. Now try to find that real quick. You might pause it for a second. 10 over 2 is 5, so I have 5 squared equals 25. That's my c value. I put it in here. Now the next one is 16, so you go ahead and try that one. So if you did it, you should have got 16 over 2 squared, which is 8 squared, which I got to be 64. Now the main reason we write this is because we can actually factor these really easy. When we factor these, that means we're going to put it in this sort of template, okay? And when you do it, it's always going to be your variable plus your b over 2. Like if I take x plus 16x plus 64, that's the same as x plus 8 squared. The b over 2, 16 divided by 2. If I look at the next one, I put my variable in first, plus, I take half of b, which is 10, so x plus 5 squared. Now just to prove to you that works, I'm going to take the x plus 8 and multiply by itself. With distribution, I get x squared. I get plus 8x. I got another plus 8x. And then the last one's 8 times 8 is 64. Well, if I combine like terms, I come back to x squared plus 16x plus 64. So if you can do those two things, if you can get the perfect square with the c value, if you can factor it down into those terms, it's going to be pretty easy. So let's go ahead and look at a couple more. Go ahead and it says complete the square. We're also going to show a way to actually solve this completely. So I want you to complete the square on y squared plus 8y. I'll give you just a second. Our b is 8 on this one, so I take 8 divided by 2 and square it. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and I square it, and I get 16. So this is plus 16. Now I want to try to factor it real quick and see what happens. I know it's going to be in that form. I put my variable first, and then I take that b over 2, which is actually that right there, and I factored it, okay? So over here there's some steps to do that. It says find the half of the coefficient of y, which is our b value, so that's b over 2. Then you're going to square that. That's where we get the b over 2 squared. And then you're just going to add it to what you had originally. So we had 16 came out for b over 2 squared. I added it to the end. Now we're actually going to solve the next one, guys. We're going to start off the same way, but we're going to do a few more steps. Now I've got a little box over here that says what to do, and we need to follow it completely. It says move the constant to the other side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 10 to both sides, and I'm going to rewrite it below. Now I have 2y squared plus 4y equals positive 10. So I move the c to the other side. The next thing I need to do is sort of like our swing method. I need to divide everything by a. So I'm going to divide every one of these pieces by 2. 2 over 2y squared over 2y over 2 leaves me y squared. 4y over 2 leaves me 2y. And 10 divided by 2 is 5. Now, if a is 1, which it will be a lot of times, you don't have to do that step, but you always have to check. So we've done number 1, we moved the constant. We've done number 2, divide everything by the coefficient of y squared. Now it said add the new number to both sides. Well, that new number is the b over 2 squared. So I can look over here and I found out my b equals 2. So I can put that in my equation. So I'm going to take my b, which is 2, I'm going to divide it by 2 and square it. 2 over 2 is 1 squared, which equals 1. So in my next step, I'm basically going to add that. So I have y squared plus 2y, and I'm going to add plus 1, kind of like what we were doing above, except for on the other side I had 5, and I can't add 1 to one side and not the other, so add that 1 to both of those. So that's where the 1s are coming from. Now I can factor it. Now this factor is where we do, is where we do our variable plus b over 2 squared. So my variable is y. I know that b is 2, and I know that b over 2 is 1, so I get y plus 1 squared. And then just fix the other side. 5 plus 1 is 6. Now we can actually solve. If we could get that y out from under that squared, we could actually get numerical answers. So what I'm going to do to undo that square is take the square root of both sides. That's number 5. Well, when you take the square root of something squared, it just leaves what's inside, the y plus 1. But we can't really take the square root of 6 without a decimal, so we're going to change it, or just keep it as the square root of 6. But notice what I have here. You have to keep in mind something. I could have negative 1 squared or 1 squared. So if you have negative 1 squared, that's 1, but 1 squared is also 1. So you don't know when you're taking the square root of 1 whether you're getting the plus or minus. So when you take the square root of something, you have to have plus or minus. Now all I have to do is solve for y by subtracting 1, and I get y equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 6. You could also write that plus or minus the square root of 6 minus 1. Either way, it doesn't matter. Now, since we got something that wasn't a perfect square and it would give us a decimal, we're just going to leave the answer that way. Now, it's a lot of steps, guys, but if you do it a few times, this is the easiest way to factor. So let's practice a few more on the next page. So step 1 is move our c to the other side. So I'm going to subtract 8 on both sides of this one. So now I have x squared plus 6x, but I'm going to leave some space. I'm going to put that equals negative 8 on the other side. Now I need to find out what goes right here, my perfect square. So I'm going to take my b, which is 6, I'm going to divide it by 2 and square it. So 6 over 2 squared is 3 squared, which equals 9. So I'm going to put 9 right here, but I can't add 9 to one side, not to the other, so I add 9 over there as well. Now here's the part where we factor. I have x something squared equals, now I take b over 2 to get my number that goes in there, which is 6 over 2, so I get plus 3. Then I need to clean up the other side, and I get 1. So right back where we were on the last page. Now take the square root of both sides. That takes out the squared and leaves me x plus 3. But I can take the square root of 1, it's 1, but remember it's plus or minus 1. Now we can do our last step. We can subtract 3 from both sides. So I get x equals negative 3 plus or minus 1. Now this one came out nice, so I want both answers. That's negative 3 plus 1 and negative 3 minus 1. So negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. Negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. So there are your solutions. So be careful, go slow, follow the steps. There was no arithmetic in that was very bad. You just have to follow your steps. Let's go ahead and look at number 2. Now this one's kind of set up in an odd order, but we noticed on the last one we have to have x squared and our x on one side and our number on the other. So to fix this one, I'm going to add 6x to both sides. Now I have x squared plus 6x, I'm going to leave some space, equals 27. Now something we didn't do last time, we didn't check our division, but a was 1 last time just like it is now, so there's no point in dividing because it's not going to change anything. So let's find what our completing the square will be. Remember, it's b over 2 squared. In this one, our b is 6, so 6 over 2 squared, and I think we've seen this one before, is going to give us 9. So I'm going to plug 9 into both sides of the equation. Plus 9 on the left, plus 9 on the right. Now I can write my perfect square trinomial with factoring. Remember, it's our variable first, plus. I'm going to take my b and divide it by 2, and that gives me 3. So x plus 3 squared equals 27 plus 9 is 36. Now we take the square root of both sides. You get x plus 3 equals 36 is a perfect square, so you get plus or minus 6. And now we just solve. I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. You get x equals negative 3 plus or minus 6, but since we had a perfect square, we're going to go ahead and solve that. I have negative 3 plus 6, which equals positive 3, and negative 3 minus 6, which equals negative 9. So there are your solutions. Now let's look at one more. Number 3. We have 4x squared plus 8x minus 16 equals 0. And again, our first order of business is to add that c to both sides. And let's leave our space. So I have 4x squared plus 8x equals 16. But in this one, I do have to divide because my a is 4. So I'm going to divide each piece by 4. I'm left with x squared plus 2x, I'm going to leave some space, equals 4. But after that, we're right back where we were on all the other problems. So I'm going to take my b value, divide it by 2, and square it. Well, our b is 2, so 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 1 squared is 1. I'm just going to add 1 to both sides. Now I need to factor it. Remember, b over 2 is going to give me my number, so I have x plus 2 over 2 is 1, equals 4 plus 1 is 5. I take the square root of both sides. I get x plus 1 equals plus or minus. Now the square root of 5 is not going to work out nicely, so I'm just going to leave it there. I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. I get x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. If you put plus or minus the square root of 5 minus 1, that's just as good. So there you go, guys. If you have any questions, you can come ask me in class. Good luck.